This is part four of our series on treatment of religious trauma. And we are going to talk about trauma reprocessing. This is for discrete events that we had mentioned earlier in the last segment. And here's the overview. So, there's a sort of 6-step process that we're going to go through, and we're going to talk about each one of these at a time so you get a little bit more detail or in-depth information on each. So before we start that, anytime that we begin to do reprocessing, we want to be on the lookout. We want to be extremely tuned in to our client. We want to attend to their words and to their body language. So you're going to watch for any kind of dissociation. You're going to watch for anything that seems very different to you, or I said very different, that it actually can be just a little bit different. You want to look for subtleties. Dissociation sometimes looks like somebody who has just sort of got a faraway look. Maybe they are a little distracted, or maybe they look like they're just lost in thought for a moment. If that happens, you need to check in with them and make sure that they are just lost in thought and they have not started to dissociate. So you also don't want to rush. You want to make sure that you are going slowly enough that you're not pushing the client into something they're not ready for. And again, be prepared to use a safety technique or a grounding technique, anything that you set up in safety and stabilization that you know is going to help them get back in control of their nervous system. Okay, so with that being said, we're going to move on. So the goal of this is to take an implicit memory or an implicit memory gap and marry it to narrative in the prefrontal cortex. And I see here that my face is over top of part of the screen. No matter where I put it, it's always in the way. We want to do that. We want to also combine that with a client who's relaxed so that their central nervous system gets the message that they can have this memory, even if it's very scary and painful emotionally. Maybe it was painful physically, but they can have this memory. They can attach it to words, and they can still have control of their nervous system at the same time. So they can maintain a relaxed posture while they're holding this memory. And that is really sort of where the magic happens of reprocessing. That's the goal. Okay, let's see here. So the first thing that we're going to ask them to do is we're going to ask them to construct a timeline. So let's talk about when you think the event would have begun and when you think the event would have ended. And we're talking about a discrete trauma. So let's say, I'm going to use the example of a girl who had seen her aunt who was in ICU after a really bad accident, and she was very, very close to her aunt. So she was, I think, 9 when this happened. She enters into the ICU room and sees her aunt who's beat up from the accident and has tubes going in and out of her everywhere. So let's say she's describing this event. She might describe the beginning of that event from the time that she sort of turns the corner and sees her aunt lying in the bed, tubes going in and out, machines whirring, that kind of thing. The end of the event is when she leaves the room. So, beginning, we got a clear beginning, we got a clear ending. Whatever event it is that your client is working with, you want to define where's the beginning and where's the end, how much time elapses between the beginning and the end. Okay, so you're going to construct the timeline. I'm going to go back to that for a second. You're going to put little things on here. I turned the corner, saw my aunt. I walked closer to the bed. The machines were whirring. I, the next thing that sort of happens that stands out in their memory. So you're going to put little hashtags all the way across this timeline, and put the highlights of the events from, maybe the sub events, however you want to say it, from beginning to end. After you've done that, you're going to do subjective units of distress. So you're going to use that timeline, and then you're going to construct a hierarchy of subjective units of distress. So you're at the, before you turn the corner to go into the hospital room, how distressed were you on a scale of 0 to 10? If 10 is the most distressed you've ever been and 0 is 0, where would you put your SUDS at that particular moment? And I usually will write this on the opposite side of the timeline. So if the timeline is here and we've got the beginning, maybe 0, maybe 2 or 3, depending on, the person, whatever they tell you. And then the next hashtag, on the same thing, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the, most distressed you've ever been, where were you at the next hashtag? And you're going to do that through the entire timeline so that you have a SUDS hierarchy for each part of the timeline. So, you know what the baseline is as you walk through the timeline for each sort of sub area. Once you've done that, you're going to go through a relaxation exercise with them. You want to know when you finish this exercise, what is their SUDS at the end of that. You're going to do the relaxation exercise until you can bring that SUDS back down to what they normally are at, which most people, some people might say a 0, but that's pretty uncommon. Usually folks are a 2, 3. That's pretty normal for folks. Depending on how much ANS hijacking they have, they may be at a 5 or a 6. It just sort of depends. But you want to get them back down to whatever SUDS they started at before you started doing the timeline. All right. So then you're going to talk about, okay, how do we know that your subjective units of distress have risen? What were your clues? We're going to look for that when those things first start happening. Want to increase awareness, use some of those safety and stabilization skills and exercises that we taught in psychoeducation. We really, as we're reprocessing in the next steps, we don't want more than a 2-point rise in their SUDS. So if they begin to feel their distress rise, you're going to coach them to go ahead on their own. They don't have to have you lead them or ask for permission or whatever. You want them to take the initiative and just go ahead and do whatever exercise or intervention that works for them the best. Maybe that's grounding, maybe that's something else, but whatever it is, you want them to just go ahead and do that when they begin to feel it rise. If it's risen 2 points, we're going to take a pause. We might completely stop the exercise for that day, or we may continue depending on how long it sort of takes to get their ANS under control. All right, so if they can get their ANS under control, then we're going to go ahead and move forward. Might be today, it might be next time, depending. All right, so what I normally do is I'll normally reach over to my printer and I will take out a sheet of paper like so. And I'm going to fold this piece of paper in half so that it looks like this. And I'm going to give this to the client and I'm going to ask them to write me the first half of the story from the timeline. Just this half of the paper. I'm going to fold it just like this. Just like so. There we go. I'm going to tell them they've got 5 minutes to do this. And it's really important that you set a time on it because trauma is really hard to sort of sit with, especially when you don't know how long something's going to last and you have to stay there with it. So we want to tell them, I'm going to give you 5 minutes and here's a pencil, here's a clipboard, whatever. I want you to write the first half of the story and then we're going to take a pause. So I'll give them this. I'll usually give it to them on a clipboard like so. Here we go. and I'm going to have them just write this down. I'm going to time them. I'm going to watch their body language so that I'm looking for dissociation. I'm looking for discomfort. I'm looking for more rapid breathing. I'm looking for anything that indicates their SUDS is going up. I might check in with them, but mostly I'm going to be quiet and watch the clock. I will give them a 1-minute warning, and I will tell them you've got 30 seconds. And then, okay, let's put your pencil down. How are you doing? Check in with what's your SUDS level right now. Give me a number. If it's risen, we're going to do a little bit of an exercise so that we can bring it back down. Once it's back down, I'm going to take the piece of paper, and they have written on this top part at this point, and I'm going to turn it like this. So now the bottom part's exposed. Get back on here and say, okay, now I want you to start in the middle and go from the middle to the end and write the rest of the story. And I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do that. So give the clipboard back to them, let them do their thing. Same thing, I'm going to watch, be really vigilant about attending to them. 1-minute warning, 30-second warning. How are you feeling? If they have any rise in their SUDS, then we're going to do relaxation until we can bring that back down to where we started at. Okay, next, I'm going to take another piece of paper out of my printer, and I'm going to explain to them what it is that we're going to do now is we're going to do a picture narrative. And we're going to do a picture narrative in just sort of like a cartoon. And we're going to do that in 6 pictures. So I'm going to fold the paper to where it has 6 little squares like this. And I'm just going to fold it over from top to bottom and then fold it in this direction. When I unfold it, it's got the 6 little squares on it. That's just the simplest way to do it, I think. So I'm going to put this on the clipboard, and I'm going to tell them that they have about 5 minutes to do this as well. I want them to start with picture number 1 or square number 1. And then I want them to do the very last one down here. And I'm doing that because that sort of helps encapsulate the experience. Once they've done square number 1 and square number 6, then they're going to go back in and put pictures that tell the story. Now remember, they've got the timeline and they just wrote the narrative of this. We don't give like any cares at all about what their pictures look like. The important thing is that they're making the pictures that is sort of in their mind, what depicts for them the events of this. So I'm going to give this to them, give them something to draw with, let them do it, count down the time. You got a minute, you got 30 seconds. Whenever they're done with this, or if we need to, we can interrupt if their subjective units of distress goes up. I've never had anybody who, by the time we get to this point, needed to stop, but that doesn't mean it wouldn't happen tomorrow. So, all right, once they've got their sort of comic strip or pictograph done, we are going to do a verbal narrative. So at that point, normally I will say, is it okay if I come sit over here next to you? Or if I, where I can see your picture board. Yes, normally I've never had anybody tell me no. So I will move my chair over. I usually have a rolly chair, but I will move it over to where they're at. If I was doing this online, I would say to them, if we were in the same space right now, I would want to be where I could be close to you, but I could see your picture. So just know that I'm here with you emotionally, and I'm going to ask you to turn this around so that you can show it to me as you're telling me the story. And probably have to work through the logistics of that a little bit online. But you want to be where you can see the storyboard and you can see the client as well, and be positioned fairly close to them in their personal space. All right. So then what I want them to do is I want them to tell me the story. So if you would start with number 1 or square number 1. and tell me the story of what it was that happened, like in this pictograph. So I'll listen very closely because I want to try when the client is done with this, I'm going to tell the story back to them. And it's really important that I capture their tone, their cadence, and the terms that they use. Whatever vocabulary they use is really important. So I'm going to have them do that. And then I'm going to ask them, may I hold that? They'll usually pass it to me. And then I will turn it to where, they can see it and they can see me. And then I will retell the story frame by frame by frame by frame, trying as closely as I can to match their tone, their cadence, the inflection that they put with it, um, the vocabulary and the words that they use to the extent that I possibly can. Once this is done, hopefully we've not had to stop in order to bring down their suds. If we have, that's fine. Normally it doesn't happen this late, but it could. So just be aware. Once we've done that, I will check what their suds is. If it's not risen, it shouldn't have risen more than 2 points, or they would have told me and we would have stopped and we would have done, an exercise. You can do that with many of the discrete traumas. So if you've got somebody that's had 4 or 5 discrete traumas, you can do that with each one if you want to do that. What I've found is that once we do that with one and the client knows the steps to do it, oftentimes they will do more of this on their own as long as they feel safe to do it and they have a safe space for that. If they don't have somebody or some place that they can sort of work through that outside of therapy, then they may ask to go ahead and work through this next event or, another event. Oftentimes I will ask them before I start, what event do you want to start with? Sometimes it's the most troubling event, and sometimes it is the least troubling event because they might lack confidence and they want to start small and sort of build a success. So if they've done that, then oftentimes they will want to come into therapy in order to walk through the reprocessing on the most challenging or the most painful, hurtful event that has occurred to them as well. Once you've done that, and they feel like they're ready to move on from reprocessing, they don't feel like there's anything else they need to go through reprocessing with in therapy with you, then you can transition to some type of trauma-informed care, whether that is CBT or whether it's cognitive processing or whether it's narrative therapy, whatever modality it is that you want to use that is trauma-informed. Because most folks who are coming in, I shouldn't say it like that. Because folks who are coming in with religious trauma oftentimes have still some spiritual needs, or they may want to incorporate spirituality into their treatment. Just be aware of that and incorporate that as much as they and you feel comfortable in doing so. And that is the overview with a little bit of detail as far as cognitive reprocessing. I'm going to take a pause here so that you guys can discuss or do whatever it is that you need to do.